Thanks for joining. And I know we've got some Ohio Wesleyan students and alums joining us here on Zoom and on LinkedIn. So it's great to have you all and look forward to more joint programming in the future. So with that, let me turn it over to Praveen.
Hi. Hello, everyone. I'm Praveen. I'm first year MBA graduate student at Veale School of Management, and I'll be moderating this session today. So yes, let's start with a small introduction from Jon. So Jon, if you could go ahead and talk about your current thing and your journey as an entrepreneur, something about your entrepreneurship things, and yeah, then we'll have questions from the audiences.
Well, thanks, Praveen. Yeah, Praveen and I had a chance to talk on earlier this week, and maybe what's helpful just to begin is to share a little bit about my own journey, because entrepreneurship, I guess, takes different forms, and I consider some of the things that I've had the privilege of doing over the last 20 years as a form of entrepreneurship. After I left Ohio Wesleyan, I went to Ohio University for sports administration, and ended up in New York, in a kind of a heady time for the internet. This was kind of Internet 1.0, 1999, and I joined a business focused on sports management, but then quickly shifted to starting the economist.com website, the first version. They didn't have a website in 1999, so I had the honor of starting that business up from scratch, and spent 4 years there building that up from kind of the inception to a meaningful part of its overall revenue. And then I got a call from Google in 2003, and really that shift was about what I saw happening in the digital advertising ecosystem. Again, not many people had a lot of experience in this space at the time, so in many ways, I was one of the few people who maybe had a body of experience with a reputable publisher, and had the chance to come to Google. And I really kind of describe my time at Google in 4 phases. It was a 12-year journey, but it really was kind of 4 distinct phases. The first one was building up this nascent business called search advertising, which today obviously is a $100 billion business. But there were days at the very beginning where we were getting kicked out of meetings where people didn't understand the value proposition. It was text. It wasn't the big flashy advertising, but it was highly effective. And so we were teaching the industry how to make this transition to performance marketing. And then we bought a company called YouTube, and I'm sure everybody's familiar with that, but that was 2006, and it was early days of digital video. And I think we had a part in ushering in this era of digital video consumption and the transition for advertisers from television to just more broad video-based advertising, which is inclusive of online and terrestrial television. And today, those 2 lines are completely blurred. What is the difference between you watching a show on your tablet or watching a show on your phone and watching it on your television? So in many ways, that was a transition that I had to learn a lot about. How do you go up against a television advertiser? How do you change the product to attract that type of business? Then we had search, and then we bought YouTube, and then we bought a company called DoubleClick, which probably most people don't know what that is. But if you're familiar with how internet advertising gets served across the entire web, DoubleClick is the kind of the pipes, the infrastructure that runs all of the advertising across the web. So a lot of the publishers that run advertising use DoubleClick, and essentially what we were able to do with that acquisition was usher in this era of more data-driven marketing, very, very precise, what we call programmatic advertising, that leveraged very, very in-depth first-party data assets to make advertising across the web more relevant. And that again became a multi-billion dollar business. And then finally, our entire business shifted from desktop to mobile, which was a huge transformation for Google. And so again, learning a new kind of skill. How do you transition all of our existing products to a mobile environment? So again, those were some of the kind of experiences. Then I came to Pinterest 6 years ago, and I saw some of the raw ingredients in Pinterest to go build this up from 100 million users and 125 million in revenue to today, almost 500 million users, and next year will be over 3 billion in revenue. So it's been a fun process of building up that. I think it's the key word that I always use is building and learning, because each of those phases at Google, the experience at Economist, and now at Pinterest are all about building something up from its nascency to scale. And that's what I've enjoyed throughout my career.
Cool. That's really interesting to know how you have seen phase when you had to convince people to buy ads in Google, and now people have been using Google and they're like self-doing everything. This is a drastic change from that era to this. So yep, we are open for questions, and I would wait for people to post questions. And the simple rule is just raise your hand. I will let you know. You can speak ahead. Just unmute yourself and go ahead. Go give a small listen. So, and then ask a question. I don't see any questions right now, so I'll start with my question, which would be around, so one of the basic questions is for people like us or people like in colleges right now, and they want to start something. So what are the basic things they have to keep in mind? Like some small quote, something you have for people like us, or any guidelines. Let's just keep this thing in mind when you start, and don't just go over fancy things. Do you have something basic for people to follow when they want to start?
Well, I'm sure you all know this. I'm not going to tell you anything that you don't already know, but you always want to start with what is the consumer problem that you're trying to solve in a different way than it's being solved today. And the lens that I take when I think about that is what is the application of technology on that problem? And that's my lens. It's not always going to be the right lens to think about. But when I think about where I invest, when I talk to people, like, what are those opportunities to apply technology to an existing problem? And I think you see this happening, in various industries. I'm really excited about the fintech space, and you see what's happening with companies like Afterpay. I think they got acquired for $30 billion for just installment-based financing. Which again is a consumer insight about how the next generation of consumers, younger consumers, want to pay. They don't use credit cards as much, and so they want to have these options to pay over time. You're going to see a proliferation of those type of services. I think the application of technology to healthcare and life sciences is hugely interesting. Again, an industry that really hasn't seen a ton of innovation before recently by applying technology to improve the patient experience and improve outcomes is another example. And now you're seeing this kind of happen in other categories like climate change, climate tech, and how can the application of technology on top of that industry help solve some really big problems that we have. So again, it starts with the problem that you're trying to solve. My lens is usually, what is the application of technology on top of that?
Sure. So we have a question from Suzanne. And Suzanne, if you would like to unmute yourself, introduce, and then go ahead and ask a question.
Hi, Suzanne Brady-Kelney. I'm a professor in the School of Medicine, and I'm interested in what you mentioned about biotech and healthcare. But you've seen so many transitions. What's the next major transition you see in the industry, or as you mentioned, maybe healthcare?
Well, again, I think the biggest transition where you see the most money going into right now and the kind of the most emerging area is climate technology. I've gotten involved with a couple of funds that are trying to solve these problems in just really bold, audacious ways. And I just think there's a lot of money flowing into this. There's kind of a trend where you see every company having to both talk to their employees and their investors about what their carbon neutral strategy is. And you can see the commitments that companies are making in the next 10, 15, 20 years about addressing their footprint on the world. And I think that's because employees demand this. Employees want to work at places that match their personal values. And increasingly, you're going to see investors start to demand this also. They're going to start asking those questions. So you see kind of chief sustainability officers start to spring up at companies. And I think this is the next big trend. In healthcare, I'm probably out of my depth here, but I feel like there's been more money that's poured into healthcare in the last 10 to 15 years than maybe there has in climate tech. And there's still a lot of room for innovation there, a lot of room for improvements in patient outcomes, and just the experience. I mean, I guess the canonical example we're probably all experiencing right now is just the rise of telemedicine and how that just makes it so much easier to do the basic things, while going to a doctor physically would be something you do for more serious things. So that's a very basic concept, but I think there's just some really cool things that are happening in the mental health space. Talkspace is an example of how they're rethinking the therapy experience, where you just get on your phone, you talk to a therapist, in the moment, as opposed to setting an appointment, going to it. When I was at Google, I was working with the team at Veale, which is the kind of the health tech division. And I do remember some of the experiences that we were starting to build at the very early stages. The first two I remember was, one was a contact lens that could monitor your glucose through your tears. And, this is the glucose monitoring industry is like a $25 billion industry. There's a lot of, concern. Actually, this will become even more of a problem in America with diabetes. So this is a real problem that needs to be solved. And, for people who are pricking their fingers multiple times a day, that's a terrible experience. So if you could actually have a contact lens that was monitoring your glucose, and you close your eyelids and it was like red or green, whether or not your insulin was proper. So that was actually a really cool application of the technology. And then another one was something called the baseline study, which was effectively just trying to constantly monitor people's vitals through a pill that you would swallow. Again, this isn't commercially available. This was just being tested, but a pill that you would swallow that would be connected to the internet. And basically it would monitor all of your vitals 24 hours a day. So essentially, instead of you going to a doctor once a year, when you could have eaten right for the last 7 days, you could have exercised, and now your blood pressure came down. Could you imagine a scenario where, this technology was telling you that your heart rate is 30% higher for the last 4 days, and you should go see a doctor in your area, and here's a doctor that specializes in this particular practice. Those were mind-bending examples of what we could do really differently in the healthcare space, that I thought, we talked to a couple of CEOs about this, and I think they were all kind of equally blown away if this was possible. Again, there's a lot of implications behind it, but that's just kind of the lens that I think Google took to that problem, and a lens that still is an opportunity to take to really fundamentally transform how the healthcare system works.
Good to know. So we have another question from Madison Miller. I think that is a question from LinkedIn. If Madison, you there, you can unmute and introduce, and go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Madison Miller. I'm a senior at Ohio Wesleyan pursuing a double major in marketing and psychology. And I'm actually also a member here at the Entrepreneurial Center with my nonprofit. But I am so curious. We've talked a lot about transitioning in industry, and with your extensive experience from taking Google from desktop to mobile, and even with YouTube and watching everything move with video consumption, my question for you is about Pinterest. And I've noticed a few added features here in the recent updates revolving around a consumer's love for short video consumption. So with that being said, what's next for Pinterest to compete with other social media platforms that have capitalized off of that feature?
Yeah, well, it's very astute of you, Madison, to have noticed that. It's actually an interesting kind of journey that we've been on. And what I would say is that the way that people use Pinterest in the past, it really started as a place for our founders to collect things across the web that they found interesting, and then put them onto boards that represented their interests and represented things that they either liked or they wanted to do. And they wanted to save those ideas for the future. And so over time, we've, again, built the service up to nearly 500 million people who are saving billions and billions, hundreds of billions of pins onto nearly 10 billion boards. So we have this kind of huge collection of first-party data and first-party experiences that people are curating. And we kind of call it our taste graph. It's like, it's your personal taste, it's your personal preferences. And we know more about you based on what you're pinning and saving on the platform to help recommend new ideas to you that you might be interested in the future. And so the transition that we're making is, the way that happened before was that people would curate ideas from across the web. Well, what you see happening today is more and more content is getting published directly into platforms, kind of bypassing the web, if you will. You can think about this in Snap. Snap has their Discover section where people are publishing directly into Snap. YouTube has YouTube Originals, and there's all kinds of content that's exclusively available on YouTube. And so what we have to, and TikTok obviously is doing the same thing with original content that's being published there. So what we really said, we need to kind of empower this army of creators to build content for Pinterest. And do it in a way that's congruent with the experience, congruent with what we want people to actually do on the platform. We want them to find ideas. We want them to get off of Pinterest to go do those in their real life. So we're not about just spending time and entertainment and kind of mind-numbing things. We want this to be something that you find ideas, and our goal is to get you off of Pinterest to go do those things. So we're now empowering media companies, influencers, brands, even individuals who are experts to publish on Pinterest at scale with original content. And I think it's one of the biggest kind of changes and transformations for Pinterest in our 10, 11 year history, to make it really about the creator, the personalities, and the content on the platform. And we're going to be introducing kind of new monetization opportunities that go alongside that too. So it's kind of I kind of view it as like the last 6 years have gotten us to this first, milestone, this base camp, and then the next journey is ahead of us with this creator strategy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I thought I saw something coming when the watch feature was added. So I was curious to know if you guys were starting to dabble in that video consumption era. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes. So I think I'll go ahead with one more question. So I would, since we don't have right now anything on the question list. So I think we talked about this in our last meeting. I will just repeat the same question. There are lots of people who do not come from technology background, and they also want to start, and they find it difficult. What is your suggestion, and how can they tackle this problem of starting when they are? And you told earlier that what to build is something which you can change with technology. So technology is so much needed for everything today. So what would your suggestion and recommendation to those kind of people?
Well, again, I think if you start with the problem, the problem is universal, right? So technology can be part of that solution. By the way, technology doesn't have to be everything. That's just kind of, again, that's the lens I'm bringing to the table. But there are many examples of entrepreneurs who are solving problems that don't center on technology per se, but that just solve the problem in different ways. So don't be afraid of that. That being said, if technology is going to be a part of that solution, what I would say is there are, it used to be that you had to go, have a computer science background yourself, or you need to have a good network of people who you could tap to go build that prototype. And what's happening right now is there's a whole, kind of industry being formed around what they call low code or no code services, which really allow people like me, at least, I don't know about you, but the people like me to build prototypes without having a lot of knowledge of engineering and coding. And I think this is a really interesting area. Google started to invest in this as well. And I think what you're seeing is kind of the democratization of technology builds. And so I think it's exciting to think about, being able to do that even if you don't have that background. So I say don't be afraid of it, because technology is actually solving the technology problem, ironically.
Yep, that helps. That will help a lot. So I think Michael will have another question now.
Great. No, thanks, Praveen. And thanks again, Jon, for joining us. It's a great conversation. Let's talk about the pandemic and what it's meant for your work, what it's meant for the way you hire, the way you call on clients, and sort of as you look out to the future, how have things changed? I mean, we've heard about many technology companies telling folks that they can work from home forever. Many of our folks that may live in Ohio, be down at Ohio Wesleyan or in Cleveland, the thought of like, oh, what this might mean, could you live in Cleveland and work for the Pinterests or the Google of the world? So I'm sort of curious what the pandemic has meant to your world, and what do you see in terms of going forward, and particularly as it relates to hiring and retaining talent?
Yeah, it's a great question. If you would have asked me this question April 1st of last year, I would have told you that this is going to be a huge drag on productivity, a huge drag on the way we work, and we're going to have major issues. And what we found was the opposite, was that people were highly productive. We developed new mechanisms to allow them to be productive through technology, but also just through new ways of learning, new ways of sharing information, new skill building in a remote environment. And we had, one of our most productive, best years we've ever seen. So it proved to us that, this notion of being in the office 100% of the time, really isn't needed anymore. And for someone like me who commutes an hour and 15 minutes into New York City every day, like, this was an epiphany. This was a great moment. And so it's kind of changing our thinking, going forward, to be more prescriptive about what is the work that is required to do in person together. And then, by the way, there still is a role for the office, and there still is a role for people getting together. And we've started to define what some of those things are. For our world, obviously, if a client wants to meet with you, you got to do that in person, and if they want to. There's also a lot of like team, strategy sessions and collaboration and whiteboarding that hasn't been effective when in a more remote environment. And then just, onboarding and training new team members too. I think onboarding has been a challenge. We've hired hundreds of people in the last year, and what I would say is we've improved our onboarding process, but there still is that human connection with the team. We call them the pod. That pod is a really important unit, and that unit needs to be really close and connected. And so we feel like that's another reason why people will be working in the office. But the direction essentially is that they'll be in the office between 1 and 3 days a week, and the rest of the time they can be at home. I think moving forward, what we have to really do is define which roles can be done fully remotely, and then which roles are required to be tied to an office because they are connected to a client. That's something in our business that's important. So we've done that step. We've taken that step to say here's the roles that can be done fully remote. There's about a quarter of them that can be fully remote, and they can live anywhere. And there's going to be about 75% in a sales organization that will be tied to an office, but only come in 1 to 3 days a week. With that, I think your last question around like hiring and retaining, I think this has been an interesting conversation for us to say, hey, if people are remote, can we look at skills, not backgrounds, not companies they come from, but the skills that are needed in this job? and by the way, this isn't just remote. This can be for in office teams too. But it really comes through with the remote employees, where we can find people for remote positions in North Carolina or Florida or Ohio, and we're tapping into a whole new talent base that may not come from Google because they haven't had that policy before, or Twitter or Snap or Facebook, but they actually have the analytical skills or the customer service skills, and they have the finance skills to help us solve that problem. So we've taken a skill-based hiring approach. We've changed our hiring profile. We've changed the way that we're recruiting and sourcing people to find industries that might be adjacent to advertising that we can go recruit from. And then once they get here, we've given them an Ads 101 training, a really in-depth Ads 101 training, all done virtually, as well as a 30-day kind of in-depth Pinterest advertising overview as well. So essentially for 6 weeks, they don't even do their job. They just get up to speed on the industry and on Pinterest, and then we feel like that's a really good launching pad for them to be successful in the business.
Awesome, thanks, Jon.
So I just want to follow up on one aspect of Michael's question, which is, for our students that are interested in developing businesses, the world is talking about how it's impossible to hire people right now, right? So it's a combination of both hiring and retention. And the issue seems to be like what people really want to do for a living, right? And Michael talks about this all the time in a series of interviews, but I just wondered what your perspective is on how do you hire and how do you retain?
Well, I think, the starting point is, this generation of talent, again, as I was saying before, wants to be emotionally connected to the company that they're working with and for. And so I think the values and the purpose of that company is more important than ever. They need to be on that mission. By the way, we all do. That's not just a younger generation thing, but it really comes through with that younger generation. They want to feel like they're part of a bigger purpose. They want to feel like there's an end game that we're working towards that's a positive and productive purpose, and that the values of that company match their personal values. And then I think they want to continue to be challenged. And one of the great things about Pinterest, at least, is that we feel like we have more opportunities, more challenges, more chances for people to address big issues for our business or for our culture than we have people. So if you're looking for a place where you can have an impact at some scale, at a pretty large scale, like our feeling is that this is a place where you can not only just do your job, but you can also have a broader impact. And and then finally they got to feel like they're continuing to improve. And so we spend a lot of time and learning, spend a lot of time thinking through the skill-based training agenda that we bring forward to the team, so that I always say to people, like, if Pinterest isn't the right place for you, we're going to make you so marketable. We're going to make you in such high demand because so much about the advertising ecosystem, so much about your customer's business, and you've got the skills to apply that to other businesses. I hope there's a place for you at Pinterest, and don't get me wrong, like, I don't want anybody to leave. But I remember Tim Armstrong at Google telling us this too, who went on to be the CEO of AOL. He said, you're going to be somebody who has the opportunity to do a lot of different things, because we're going to prepare you in a way that is going to allow you to advance your career at Google as we continue to grow. And there'll be plenty of opportunities if that's the case. Or if this is the place for you, you're going to be in high demand no matter what. And I feel the same way about my role and our role at Pinterest to equip the next generation of leaders for the next opportunity, hopefully inside the company, if not someplace else.
Okay, so we have time for just one more question. Anyone wants to go ahead?
I have a question and I post on the chat.
Can you see that?
I'm Mabel, and I'm an EMBA student with Weatherhead Management School. So my question is about how for Jon is what's your strategy to acquiring your customer for the digital advertising? Like for your Pinterest, most content about recipes and food and lifestyles. So are you targeting those food companies or like other companies for your target audience as clients?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I mean, the Pinterest, again, historically has probably been really, really well suited for food and home and beauty and fashion, maybe travel, and a couple of other categories. Again, with that creator strategy that I described earlier, we're trying to expand the use cases that people come to Pinterest for the ideas across every category, because we can be a source of inspiration for people across lots of different use cases. But yeah, there's a couple of categories that are really areas of strength for us. And so we have a whole new business acquisition team. We have a small business team that usually is the source of a lot of our new customer acquisition efforts. And they're on the phone every day, talking to small businesses, talking to medium-sized businesses to help them understand what Pinterest can do for their business and what the objectives are that we can help them solve. Our large customer segment is more of a managed service type of approach, whereby we're already working with them in some capacity. We're working with every one of the Fortune 500, if you will. So really that acquisition arm is really dedicated to some of the up and coming direct to consumer brands like Allbirds or Casper, companies like that. And then also some of the smaller businesses that might be a really good fit for us in food, beauty, fashion, and home. And I should say we've struck partnerships also with companies like Shopify, who you might be familiar with, who essentially is running all of the infrastructure for small merchants to manage their entire catalog of products. And now recently they've started to strike partnerships with companies like Google and Pinterest and TikTok to distribute those products onto those platforms. So Shopify and these partnerships have become a really important way in which we've acquired new customers as well. Because once we have the product catalog on Pinterest, we can activate them as an advertiser as well. So it's been kind of a dual-pronged approach with our own team acquiring new businesses as well as using our partnerships to identify those high-value advertisers too. Thanks for the question.
Jon, this is from Taylor Guidry. My question is, how are companies like Pinterest attracting consumers that do not have accessibility to technology? Consumers that may have money to spend but cannot afford internet service or cannot afford a computer or have tech cell phones?
It's a great question. And honestly, it's probably an area that we have more work to do. We haven't spent a lot of our resources to essentially make either the devices or the technology available if you're not connected. I think what you're saying is basically the connection and the device itself are the important inputs to driving that kind of usage. I will say that we're trying to, for those that do have access, we're trying to make the product more inclusive of different types of backgrounds and different types of experiences. For instance, we launched something called skin tone filters for individuals who are using Pinterest when they are looking for ideas around beauty. A piece of feedback we had from our Black community was like, hey, I see a bunch of white women on the platform when I come and look for beauty ideas. So we allowed people to put their skin tone filter into the top of the results, and then all of the results would dynamically change to match that skin tone. So it's just a more personalized, more customized experience. And then this last week, we launched the same thing for hair filters. So you could choose different filters based on, I don't have to deal with this, unfortunately, but for people who do have hair, those folks can choose what their hairstyle looks like, and they can get ideas that match that. So I would encourage you to look at the skin tone filters, look at the hair filters as well. I think that's the angle that we're trying to approach this with more inclusivity, more accessibility, and more personal experiences on the platform that reflect our audience that is on the platform. But I think you bring up a really important point that that accessibility to technology is an important aspect of this as well. It's just not something that Pinterest has attacked yet.
Well, great. Well, let me jump in here to thank Veale for moderating. Really appreciate it. Jon, thanks so much for joining today. It was a very thought-provoking conversation. I too am an internet 1.0. It's funny when you're talking about your journey. I worked at AOL back in the day, which
Nice.
my students have never heard of. But no, it's interesting hearing the journey from your early days at The Economist to Google and Pinterest pre-IPO and through the IPO. And really appreciate you taking the time. And thanks to Glenn and all the folks who joined from Ohio Wesleyan to bring all of Jon's worlds together, Cleveland and Ohio Wesleyan. And Jon, we do look forward next time you're back in Cleveland to have you in person on campus at some point soon. So thanks again for taking the time.
You bet. It was a pleasure being here today. Nice to see you all. Go Bishops, and yeah, go Browns.